Hi, I'm Brian Fraser, the minister here at Brentwood Presbyterian Church. And we're in the midst of a Jesus, Jazz, and Worship project, which we're looking at the dynamics of the way in which Jesus encounters people through jazz and worship. It's funded in part by the Calvin Institute of Christian Worship at Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan, their Vital Worships grant, which in turn is funded by the Lilly Endowment, Inc. We've had some Canada Summer Jobs grant money to hire research assistants, and then there's some conference money from the Presbyterian Church in Canada. So Adele Wilding is our consultation coordinator. She's also a wonderful jazz singer, member here at Brentwood, and so very involved in this project. And tell us just a little bit about your background in jazz and church and all of the things that lead to this interest.
Well, my initial experiences of jazz occurred as a child. Jazz was one of the many genres which we listened to in our home growing up, my brother and myself. And many years later, when I'd returned to school, one of my many qualifications was a diploma in jazz and popular music studies. And I became a professional jazz singer and composer in 2002. So I've been a professional for 16 years in that genre. In terms of my spiritual background, I come from a family where my father is Church of England Anglican, my mother's a Protestant, originally from the West Indies. My brother and I were baptized in the Anglican Church. I've been an Anglican up until the time when I was about a teenager, and then for a number of reasons I'd stopped going to church. But now, much later in my life, I'm a Presbyterian convert, so to speak. And I very much enjoy the community in Brentwood Presbyterian Church.
Yeah, well, it's great to have you as
Thank
part
you.
of it. So I'm curious, what interested you in getting involved in this particular project?
I personally I'm embarking on a musical and also a spiritual journey. My involvement with the church, both as a performer at Jazz Evensong and through benefit concerts that we've had here, has fed into that journey. As a member of the congregation, the services, the Sunday worship, the mini sermons, so to speak, at the Jazz Evensong have all tapped into what I am going through currently as an artist and as a person. And when you'd approached me about getting involved with the project on a professional side, I was delighted on many levels. And I have discovered through being in this project that my new spirituality has come through what I do as a jazz artist. And it's also been feeding into my interpretation of scriptures and of readings that I've experienced here. So I was very interested to get involved with a project that fuses, for lack of a better verb, spirituality and jazz as a genre. And all the metaphors that go with jazz, like improvisational aspect, connecting through listening. And those are the aspects that got me interested in this project.
Right. Now, one of the projects that you've worked on and have done here in terms of performance, but also Jazz Evensong, is your Caribbean and Blue project.
Absolutely.
Tell us a little, so dig in a little bit to the blue stuff.
Yes. The blue side of the Caribbean and Blue project is very interesting because it explores the color blue, not just as a color and the various shades of the color, but what those shades and what the color represents to me and to my supporters, my followers, what that color represents on an emotional level, on a psychological level, and on a spiritual level. So for just over 1 year, I have been researching that project. I have been looking at the most appropriate songs that either contain blue in the title, in the lyrics, or represent the color metaphorically in some way, or how that color becomes a metaphor for other conditions.
Yeah.
So I've been compiling music for both live performances and hopefully a CD recording, which I hope to commence in 2019.
Great.
And I've incorporated that with the Caribbean side because Caribbean for me represents blueness.
Yeah.
And I believe even the recording artist Enya has a song called
Yes.
Caribbean Blue.
Yeah.
And that really sparked an interest in this project.
Right.
So we're exploring one of my roots, because I come from a mixed English and West Indian background. I've always felt the need to do a project that pays tribute to my West Indian roots, because I've never actually attempted that before. And it just came to me that having Caribbean and blue as the two themes would be the way to do that.
Yeah.
And thanks to you, I've discovered a wonderful book by Maggie Nelson called Bluettes, which I'm going to research and hopefully with Ms. Nelson's permission, extract excerpts from that book and marry those excerpts up with the music that I'm performing and recording as part of the project.
Nice. That's great. And the other thing, you may have noticed the painting in the background in these interviews. It's a wonderful image called The Spirit of Jazz, the Trinity Trio by Laura Zarabeski, who's a wonderful local painter. But one of the things Adele noticed in that painting that I hadn't picked up on was the way in which the blue flows into and out of the keyboard in a very kind of energetic and yet uplifting and enlightening. So one of the things about Caribbean and Blue from the lyrics of a couple of the songs that you've composed already is it's not that kind of heavy, sad blues. That's certainly there in some of the project, but this part of it is more that Caribbean bright blue of the water and the waterfalls and so that it's the color has both of those dimensions to it.
Absolutely. And one of the songs, as you know, is entitled Waterfall, which explores, as you've also mentioned, blue in the form of water, but it's also symbolic of a relationship between two people, so it even transcends the color itself into something a little bit more metaphysical and spiritual.
Okay. Yeah.
So there's a lot of the metaphysical side of that in this particular project.
Yeah. That's great. You were just, while we were doing these interviews, you were coordinating the conversation downstairs in terms of questions that we're going to discover. There's 20 of them, I gather, that you're going to send off to me. Which one intrigues you most?
The question that intrigued me most was one of the committee members had mentioned, and it was how do we attract a more diverse and larger demographic to this particular space through jazz worship.
Through the jazz worship services.
Yes. And I know you asked for one, but there is another one. There's a tie. There's a tie for me.
Yeah.
Another one that was mentioned was, how can we make jazz worship unique? What can we inject into a jazz worship service to make that particular event unique? And one of the examples was raised was an excerpt from a psalm.
Yeah.
And perhaps, again, like myself, wanting to delve into Maggie Nelson's book, us delving a little bit more into the scriptures and finding something that would stand out to bring a unique experience to the congregation.
That's a great idea to explore.
Yes. So it's a tie there.
Thank you so much for being part of the project. It's such a blessing for us to have you here.
Thank you. It's an honor and delight and blessing for me, Brian. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this.
You're welcome.